the president could say two things at once. He could say, I'm very sorry. I know it's very hard for Americans who are struggling with higher gas prices, the highest grocery prices in years. All of these things are terrible, but we have to make a sacrifice right now. Every American does, because Iran can't have nuclear weapons. Kind of does a shortcut, though. And he goes straight to affordability is BS. That's a made-up, phony crisis. Says he's not worried about how Americans are doing that are struggling with higher prices. And he's now talking about the stock market going high. I looked at the CBS poll this weekend, and we've seen this trend for a while, but I see that the president's underwater with white, non-college Americans. And I just see that number every time, and I'm just jarred by it. But after continuing to hear the president talk down affordability and talk up the stock market, maybe it shouldn't be such a surprise to me.
I mean, it is also surprising that number goes down, right? Because that is the base. But I don't know with him if it's the way the question is coming to him that he can, that he can't say what you just suggested, which is to acknowledge both things are true. This is tough what everybody's going through, but also we're trying to accomplish something in Iran that's important. Explain what it is. But it's the knee-jerk reaction to being criticized or being told that something's not working that he can't handle. And as much as his base has hung in there with him, I think that they have believed that he understands what their life is like, and they have believed that he is ultimately on their side. And even at times where the economy hasn't done well, they hung in there with him. But I think the repeated dismissal of how they are feeling and what's actually happening in their lives economically is catching up.
Yeah, John Lemire, I just think this is just a tick in Donald Trump. He can't say, yes, things are not going as well as we would like them to go. No, inflation is high, prices are high, and that is terrible, and we're going to work on that. But we can't have, as he says, crazy people having a nuclear weapon. You certainly could see other presidents framing it in a way that more Americans might go along with him. But the problem here is there's no end in sight to this war. We talked about strikes. Qatar is having real economic problems. You have the UAE getting attacked. Again, fortunately, no radiation leak in that attack. But you have a war that continues to drag on, and all signs point to higher oil prices and higher gas prices and higher grocery prices as we get through a war that just continues, because there is no easy off-ramp for the president of the United States.
No, he's been looking for an off-ramp for a while, has not found one. And you're right, it's pathological almost, where Trump simply cannot acknowledge anything is less than perfect. Everything's always got to be the biggest, best, greatest. If he's in charge, that means things are working inherently in his mind. And he's not able to reflect that some people out there are suffering. Let's remember a week ago, he flat out said, I'm paraphrasing only slightly, that he didn't care about Americans' personal finances because of the war in Iran. He was asked about that in that interview. He said it was a perfect statement. He would say it again. So, Congressman, there are obviously a lot of people who would disagree with that. We see poll after poll suggests that Americans, even Republicans, unhappy with how the president has handled this economy. They think his priorities are misplaced. That has to be something in your district as well.
Oh, absolutely. Affordability needs to be absolutely front and center, and it's certainly true in my district. It's especially true in California, where we have the highest cost of living in the country, highest gas prices, highest electricity prices. We're in the top three when it comes to groceries and water and housing. And so it is placing an enormous strain on folks in my state and all across the country. And I understand the idea that you don't want the Iranians to think, well, if you just inflict enough pain on American consumers, then, we'll let you have a nuclear weapon. But at the same time, we need, as policymakers, to be cognizant of the impact on the cost of living for every single decision we make. And Americans are telling us that this is the most important issue right now.
David Ignatius, the problem for the president, the problem for working Americans is there's no end in sight. I mean, Donald Trump, more threats over the weekend. The Iranians continue to mock those threats. Again, our regional allies getting hit. There doesn't seem to be any easy off-ramp. I know we've talked about that for weeks now, but there is no end in sight, is there?
So, Joe, the president has not found a way to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, and that's a big problem, and it's getting worse week by week. It's been around now for months, so I think it tends to recede in our minds. But in terms of a real drag on the global economy, it's only getting worse. And the president's choices are bad in either direction. If he goes back to full-scale war, starts bombing targets all over Iran, takes Karg Island, go down the list of things that he could do. He takes the U.S. deeper into war, a war that the American people seem to feel is another Middle East quagmire. It's not a good option. If he accedes to Iranian demands for control over the straits, for charging tolls for ships that pass through the strait, that he's obviously reinforcing the power of this hardline regime. I hear talk that the latter, some version of reopening the strait with an understanding that Iran, which wants to be paid, which wants reparations, is going to take some money out, perhaps as part of a larger authorities. It may be the way that things are heading. But I think the baseline point to the larger discussion that you're having with Congressman Kiley is, if the president's going to ask the country for sacrifices that hurt our standard of living, and that's going to happen this summer, inevitably, because of the energy situation, he has to explain it to the country, to the people. And that continues to me to be mystifying. He simply won't make the case in any detail as to why these sacrifices are necessary. He talks about how great 401ks are. That does not speak to people who are paying more and more for gasoline.
Right. And you obviously, the president is focusing now on a nuclear Iran. We can't have a nuclear Iran. And it seems to me he can pivot off of that, David. But like you said, is not doing that. He's just denying affordability is a real problem, says he's not concerned about Americans. I will say, though, he faces a couple of problems because of his past criticisms and the Republican Party's criticisms of how they thought that the Iranians got the better of Barack Obama. If Donald Trump leaves Iran and this war, after how much it's cost American taxpayers, and Iran has nukes or more control of the strait than they did before the war, that just seems to be a catastrophic political loss, and obviously weakens America catastrophically and strengthens all of our enemies in China and in Russia.